Hello, I'm glad to have you guys with us. I'm Danielle Walker, Senior Reporter at SC Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast entitled The Art of the Test. Is Your Network Security Ready for the Real World? This webcast is sponsored by Ixia. Our speakers today are Fred Kost, who's the Vice President of Security Solutions at Ixia, and Vikram Phatak, he's the CEO of CESS Labs. Fred has been involved in information security for most of his career and has held roles at various companies, including Cisco, Checkpoint, and Symantec. And Vikram has served as CEO and Chairman of the Board of CESS Labs since 2007, and they've come out, with a lot of great research and studies from there. And he's an expert in vulnerability management and threat protection. As we mentioned earlier, this presentation will discuss the art of creating and executing security tests at your organization. And to start things off, Fred will begin the presentation. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Danielle said, the topic is the art of the test, and so what we'll do today is, talk about, testing network security, particularly for kind of real-world conditions, and look at it from the perspective of, how can you take that from being so much of an art and potentially more of a science and more structure and predictability. So as Danielle said, Vikram's joining us today to talk through that. So throughout the presentation, we'll both be commenting there, but thanks for joining today, Vic.
Thanks for having me, Fred.
So I think the next slide, not a day goes by that we don't hear about some sort of security breach or attack in the news, and unfortunately, I think sometimes we almost become numb to it. Just in the last 7 days, I was looking, and I think between the iCloud breach, Home Depot breach, and then a recent breach at a chain of San Diego hotels, all happened in the last 7 days. And you don't even have to go back a couple months, and we've seen, major denial of service attacks. We've seen breaches that are stealing information, and breaches that are really disrupting businesses. And these, when I say disrupting, either businesses can't conduct transactions, their services are offline, customer trust is damaged, and these things have, a real cost. Sometimes we're too quick to point all the direct costs, like what did it really cost, say, a target for that kind of breach. But when you look at customer trust, downtime, and just across organizations, these things all have a real significant impact. And it's not like these organizations aren't working on security. They're not trying to put in place technologies and work with people and have processes to deal with some of these things. But clearly there's some holes and things that aren't quite working. And I think each time one of these happens, we in the industry and the media, we all go through, well, how did this happen? And then kind of almost look into a crystal ball to try to figure out what went wrong. What did that one organization do? What one thing could they have done differently that could have prevented all this? And again, if you look at the sources of these, they're usually some sort of vulnerability. That vulnerability could be in a person. Someone did something that opened them up to some sort of attack. It could be their security product wasn't performing as it should or had some sort of vulnerability inherent in it. Or they perhaps weren't resilient to the attack. So the vulnerability is the fact that the way their security was being stressed or put through its paces by the attacker led someone to actually get in. So, it's very, very difficult to close all the holes, but organizations can do a good job at least at closing as many as they can, so they reduce the attack surface or the likelihood that they're going to have some kind of breach. And I think, coming from vendors, it's often, we need defense in depth and we need more security. And not that isn't a good strategy. Actually, there's lots of technologies. You need a firewall, obviously. Places in network intrusion prevention makes a lot of sense. We see a lot of momentum now toward looking at next-gen firewalls for certain places in the network. And so each of these have a very distinct function and a role to play in either preventing attacks, monitoring for attacks, and trying to keep the network secure. But I think too often, organizations move to put technologies in place and maybe don't think about, how will they really perform? Like, what is the true security effectiveness of this device? Yes, I've looked at a data sheet or I have some general information, but how will it really perform on my network? Will it be effective in detecting and stopping attacks if it's in prevention mode? But also looking at some of these products, well, what happens under load? It's one thing to have a data sheet or some sort of performance number, for instance, for a next-gen firewall, but with the heavy amount of content inspection the next-gen firewall has to do, what happens to that product when it comes under load? Is it going to be able to keep up Is it going to lose performance? Is it going to lose security? What trade-offs do I have to know about? So even though I'm putting products in place, that performance under load could greatly vary. And finally, a lot of these products are put in place to deal with vulnerabilities in server or some sort of infrastructure. But what about the products themselves? In the last year, again, we've seen security products themselves can have vulnerabilities. And so if you're putting these kind of products and technologies in place, have you thought about, what kind of things might exist in this product from a vulnerability perspective that I should know about and make sure I'm covered? So, yes, more security in general is better, but it may not always mean better security if you really understand how the products perform and what are some of the trade-offs.
So, just to touch on that for a second, Fred, I mean, we're really starting to think about this in terms of risk management now, meaning that you can do everything right and still be compromised. We've seen that time and again where the way that folks are being, the breaches are occurring are getting past every system, including some of the new breach detection technologies that have been deployed, or if they are detected, by the time somebody realizes what they've seen, it's too late. And having you practice hard in order to, or you practice like you want to play. And right now, there's no real ability to practice, or I shouldn't say no ability, but that's part of what we're here to talk about, right? The ability to practice and really put your security through its paces, so that when an event occurs, you know what you're looking at. You can see the weaknesses ahead of time. You can make adjustments to your security posture, et cetera. So, instead of thinking of it in terms of just, let's layer in security, you have to start thinking about it as, risk management, which is a continuous process, and almost, you got to play some game theory stuff, right? So I'm going to do this, and the bad guy's going to do that, and really, really test this stuff out to see where you really stand. So,
yeah, so I think about this. I think back to I was an engineer earlier in my career in the PC industry, and we had I guess I called it a test harness that we called the meat grinder, and it was meant to break our products. And so we would push on timings, look for race conditions, find any bad design mistakes or flaws before we ship the product to customers. So we used to put products through this test of facing the meat grinder, and they usually failed to some degree, and we went back and fixed them. I think that's a little bit of what we need to think about from a security perspective. Have you put your security through some sort of meat grinder that's really going to make sure they can stand up to all kinds of different conditions? Because attackers aren't going to deal with ideal conditions. They're going to try to evade detection, so they're going to try to pursue evasions that the product's going to miss, or they're going to create tremendous background load, so their attack can be blended in with other traffic, so your content inspection is stalling out and their attack gets through. Or they're going after, as I said earlier, perhaps a product vulnerability. They found a way to, let's say, exploit some sort of SSL vulnerability or something, so they're looking for that in your product. So, when you think about security products and testing, it really is sort of this meat grinder stress testing, and how can I really put the product through its paces as it might be facing when it's, on my network or under attack from a real attacker. But I think part of the problem is it's similar to shopping for cars, and if in this day and age with the price of fuel, definitely the MPG or miles per gallon is important. But when you look at a car, they all have a standard sticker on the window, and they have, in this case, 18 and 25 for city and highway. But while that's a standard number, it often really doesn't correlate with what your fuel economy is, because if you're driving with the air conditioning on, you're going uphill, downhill, you live in a particular climate, or you particularly have a lead foot or have particular driving habits, that mileage is going to vary dramatically based on how you're driving the automobile. And I think a lot of security products, we've pursued a standard, okay, at 10 gig, yes, it can do 10 gig with some standard mix of traffic. But what you find out is that, that 10 gig of standard traffic varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, and even varies more when you drop that product into your network. So how do you know that, again, the 1825 sticker that the security product's telling you, you're going to see that kind of mileage in your network? And again, security testing can really help you validate that you will see either 10 gig, or help you be more informed about what level of traffic you can handle. And again, where some of the security features may start to stall out if performance can't keep up. And again, the traffic mix, I think, is one of the biggest components there. I come from the vendor space, many years, and it was always almost a gamesmanship when you put specs together, because it's really, really dependent on the traffic mix. Large packet, small packet, what kind of applications. All those things play hugely into security performance, and so they greatly got to be taken into consideration. But I think more importantly now is not just some of the standard large packet, small packet, what's the application, but what's your real traffic mix on your network. If you're going to test security products, you probably want to begin to try to mimic the real world, the kind of applications running on your network, the kind of things that are going through your security devices, so that when you look at an assessment or begin to look at the security resiliency of that device, you can really see how it will perform when it's in my network with my real-world traffic, not some PCAP or generic traffic capture that a vendor has run through it, or that you've captured off the web or somewhere from a testing resource. And so thinking about the applications in that real-world traffic is hugely important in doing some of the security testing evaluation. And I mentioned it earlier, but I want to introduce the notion of kind of resilience, and that a lot of times we look at security from a performance perspective, and it appears to go fast. But what happens when it has harsh conditions? Actually, if you look at the definition of resilience, it talks about the ability of something to come back after it's being bent, compressed, stretched, or having elasticity. And with a lot of the security products, you want to make sure that you have security resiliency. So as I see load or I see evasion, I see something come at me, is that product going to be resilient in those conditions, continue to do inspection, continue to do enforcement, or is it, once bent out of form, not going to bounce back and be incapable of performing the security function you put in place? And so as you think about security testing, I encourage you to sort of think about adding resiliency to your vocabulary and think about security products from that perspective. And often when you think of resiliency, and sort of testing of security, people think of, well, it's vulnerability based. So, well, we already do pen tests, and so twice a year we have a pen test done, and someone comes in, and yes, they always find something, but we go try to fix the people, process, or technology hole and move on. Some people think of security testing as, maybe it's code audits or some sort of audits to look for a vulnerability in my code or in things that I'm putting on the network. Others think of it perhaps as a vulnerability assessment. So I'm going to scan the network, look for unpatched or vulnerable servers, and then have a program to mitigate those. And those all, I think, have an important security function, but they're very vulnerability focused, but also sometimes limited in scope. You do them once or twice a year, or they really fail to capture the stress test or the load test that we just talked about. And so you're not really testing real-world conditions. And so when you think about resiliency versus vulnerability, think about running real-world tests, understanding, okay, I have vulnerabilities, yes, and I'm trying to mitigate them, but the exact products I put in place to enforce policy or mitigate those vulnerabilities, how are they performing under load? And am I really getting a true assessment of those devices from a resiliency perspective when I'm running load and applications through them?
So this is a bit of a it's going to come. What I'm about to say is going to come as a bit of a surprise to a lot of folks because it's a bit new. But we actually have done some research, and we've been doing a long-term checking of security products and seeing how good or bad they are at protecting in certain applications. And Java popped out to us when we looked at our data. And what happened was we looked and saw that most of the security products, by and large, were pretty darn good at stopping attacks against Java 6. So latest, say Java 6 update 23 or whatever, right? Really, really good, close to 100%. We moved to Java 7, and the block rate dropped to between 5 and 7%. And one of the things that told us was that, we've basically been giving some very bad advice to the industry by saying patch, 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 patch. Because in this case, you basically you are secure behind these security products. You bought them for a reason. Yes, the version of Java is vulnerable. But when you move to the new version of Java, which is also vulnerable, by the way, or it will be in 30 days, right, there is no security protection. And what it came down to is that the security vendors, and I talked to a number CTOs at different security product vendors that told me, look, Java is an interpreted language. Oracle doesn't give copies of Java source code to the security vendors ahead of time before they release, so they've got to go and take time to reverse engineer the latest version of Java, then create a Java interpreter, then they've got to do all the QA to make sure there aren't false positives, and then they can finally release some security against that for Java to the public. Now, that can take for major versions of Java upwards of 12 months. So when you start thinking about security resiliency versus vulnerability, right, if you're doing the right testing, you'll uncover the fact that the older version of Java, right, may be the better place for you to be versus the new version of Java, because even though it's vulnerable, at least you're protected. Furthermore, there's a sort of theory that talks about you can never really stop the attacker. What you can do is push them in a direction or move them in the direction you want them to go. And by having such strong security for Java 6, what we're doing is telling the attackers, in effect, go look elsewhere for your target. So they move to Java 7. So all of what we're telling folks in terms of patch is effectively, okay, we push the adversary, whether it's nation state or cyber criminal, to go after Java 7 instead of Java 6, which they've done. And then we took all of our most precious resources, right, and put them upgraded them to Java 7 and took them out from behind our defensive protection. So the concept of cyber resiliency says don't do that. Keep them behind the old the protection with the older version of Java, right? Because at least you have some hope of not being compromised, or more than a hope. You've got a plan, right? So again, it's a shift in thinking on how you approach the problem. And it takes not only it takes the target into account, meaning the applications you're running, it takes the security products into account. You bought them for a reason, right? And it takes the capabilities of the threat actors into account. So, there's a new exploit against a vulnerability for whatever product and so on. And that's really what we're talking about here. So I know it's a bit long-winded, but hopefully that clarifies the thought process.
No, that's good. And we talked a little bit about, testing, and I think maybe it may have, in your mind you may be thinking, well, it's a point in time I'm testing. And what we've actually found is, some of the leading organizations that are really have advanced thinking here, they're really thinking this is almost a life cycle. So it's not just, for instance, when I procure the device, and so I'm doing a bake-off or proof of concept with 3 vendors, yes, I want to test them at that point in time. But, leading organizations are thinking, well, as I build out my network and put these devices in my architecture, I want to test that because there may be some effects of layering devices or my real applications, all the way through, versions change, things drift, there's change in security devices, changes in configuration, retesting, testing that. And so, leading organizations actually are beginning to think about this as sort of a life cycle. So it's a kind of an ongoing testing at different points in the life cycle, not just something I do at a single point in time.
And to, just for some emphasis, again, getting back to the other example, if you think about this in terms of keeping your security in alignment with the applications you're running, then you continually have updates, you continually have new threats, and so you have to continually reassess to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Sometimes it may be to patch, sometimes it isn't to patch, sometimes there may be a policy change that's required, et cetera. But if you're treating it like a static model and looking at it once a year for compliance, that's a real problem. This really needs to be a continuous process, as Fred mentioned, and it really is a life cycle.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and just kind of walk through a few real-world examples of, these are actual customers and some of the things they've sort of challenges they've taken on and solved them with security testing. And one is, the first one's a financial services company. We're rolling out a kind of a new mobile payment system. And, some of their security concerns were, as many organizations, they were looking at, can we consolidate our IPS into a next-gen firewall? And that's a big leap, consolidating some, technology into one device. Obviously, there's a heavy content inspection load there. But as part of this data center build-out project, they were also trying to build in some DDoS protection. So they want to understand, what device, what service should I pick? And if I pick it, will my architecture really stand up to a real live denial of service attack? And then the third thing they were working on was they had some sort of web security application controller technologies in place, and they were trying to consolidate some of that functionality into one device to reduce device count and simplify their architecture. And so for them, what they were able really to do is both at the device level, qualify some individual devices, understand with my traffic what I'm trying to do. Is it a wise decision to consolidate my IPS into a next-gen firewall? They're actually able to test their architecture against some high-volume denial of service attacks in the devices and services they're picking there, and then again validate some of the applications. And so they rolled out a new data center infrastructure for this mobile payment service with a much higher degree of confidence that it was going to work and their security they had chosen was going to stand up to the kind of conditions they would face when they met up with the real world. A second one is it's a global entertainment kind of company, very seasonally correct. They were launching actually a fantasy football service, which I think in the last week my team did very, very well. So very aware of the customer satisfaction opportunity there. But in this case, they again were kind of looking at how could they roll out this new service and make sure that it scaled so that the quality of experience from the customer perspective was very, very high. So they were super sensitive to availability, but at the same time wanted to make sure they had a robust security put in place. And so, again, much like the previous case, they were making decisions about a firewall, layering in a next-gen firewall. They also had high requirements for the latency and the failover of these security devices, so it had to positively fail over to deliver the quality experience they were aiming for without exception. And so as they began to look at some of the actual devices, they found, one thing, there were tremendous features lacking in their ability to achieve some of their security performance goals they were looking to deliver. But the other thing is they began testing under adverse conditions such as dropping power and really testing the high-performance failover. They found some of the vendor products had failures there, and so they were able to actually, make some device decisions, but weed out some architectural vendor selection issues early on so that they could, sort of meet this high-quality experience goal they had for this new service. And then a final example is another financial services organization. In this case, they had put in place a DDoS solution, relying primarily on a scrubbing service, but also a little bit of on-premise work. And they really want to understand, would that work when they came under an attack? And in this case, they were able to create a simulated, real-world denial of service attack, test the technologies they had put in place. But the other thing they found here was there was a fair amount of tuning of both technologies, but also their processes. The tuning of the technology was, is good traffic going to get through when I come under attack? And so there was some technology tuning they identified that needed to happen. But the other thing they discovered was that their actual people processes, like what happens to my team? We come under denial of service, my team's got to talk to the service provider upstream, we've got to do a lot of coordination. And what they found through the process is that part of their mitigation strategy really wasn't nailed down, and they walked away from the exercise with a much better response strategy, not only the technology that will work, but the people process as well. So, all real-world examples of architecture, device selection, different points in that life cycle that we talked about. And so from the Ixia perspective, we're really helping customers create the simulation and testing environment. So a combination of the devices are geared to achieve the level of performance they need, but also creating the realistic attacks, the realistic traffic patterns, so that I could truly exercise a security device using the Ixia platform. And that reality comes from library of over 35,000 attacks, 300 plus applications. And so as security devices are put through that test, they're really subjective to both the realism of application traffic, the realism of attacks, but also the kind of load conditions that they might face when they're on a real live network. So it drives a tremendous amount of realism into the test. So talk a little bit about Ixia and what we've been doing from a test platform perspective and some of the customers. NSS, obviously many of you are very familiar with, but I want to turn it over to Vic to talk a little bit about the NSS perspective and get into some of the things that we, Ixia and NSS, are doing that we think can really help advance some of your security testing efforts.
Thank you, Fred. So For those of you who've been working with us, you know that we've been using Ixia for years for a lot of the work we've been doing, amongst other tools. We've developed a pretty good working relationship with them over the years, and we'll be talking about that in a minute. So some of the things we're bringing to market together here. But so just those of you who don't know about us, we're the guys, right? We're the guys who have the experience and the know-how from a test perspective, right? We know how to find the boundaries of products, the limitations of products, and identify, what they're going to do under those adverse conditions that Fred was mentioning. There's most of the time when you think about, let's say, a data sheet from a vendor, they're thinking about it. The product marketing folks are thinking about what is it possible for this product to do, and we're thinking about it is what is the guaranteed minimum it will do, under these certain adverse conditions. Meaning, let's say that somebody says they've got a 40 gig device, but under certain traffic it's only doing 18 gigs. Well, from our perspective, it's important that you know that those limitations, et cetera. So, furthermore, I mean, there's a whole research department we have that really focuses on what is being targeted and how are the adversaries, the cyber criminals and nation states bypassing security controls. So we're working and have worked a lot of those capabilities into our testing over the years. So, just a little bit of history. Again, we've been testing for a very, very long time. I dare say within the next generation firewall, intrusion prevention, firewall, secure web gateway moving forward, antivirus, et cetera, space that all the top vendors have been tested at some point in time. Over the last 3 years, one of the things that we've discovered is that our data was very, 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 very technical, and it needed to be elevated so that it could speak to decision makers very quickly, and then allow them to dive into the details they cared about. Versus, the analogy I'll give is those of you who deal with financial folks. Oftentimes you have to train financial folks not to give you just a big spreadsheet saying, here's the financials, right? Or you need to say, okay, give me the summary, and then tell me where to look to understand what's going on, right? And so that's what all the enterprise research that we've been doing over the last few years is really all about. It brings the data that may have been hidden in a 30-page document or in deep within some spreadsheets up to the surface to say these are the things that are important. And in addition to that, we've been focusing on market trends and really getting into I'll call it technology detail that from a business perspective that folks need to know. So, okay. So one of the things, one of the things that we're doing strategically, and again, we've been working with Ixia for years, is we've put together NSS test packs that are running on Ixia equipment. And the whole rationale behind this is that we wanted to take the expertise that we have and really push it out into the enterprise, so folks can, when they're running tests, know that they're following a best practice, know that they're identifying these edge cases that may be of a concern, and that there's so much detail in doing this right that it just takes we've learned over the years. I mean, examples are Fred mentioned sort of this security stalling. He's being generous. I mean, from what oftentimes happens is different products have what they call best effort, or they'll have performance protection, or various marketing terms for it. But basically what it means is that, let's say you bought a 20 gig intrusion prevention product, but in order to hit 20 gigs, the CPU under normal conditions, if with full security, it would bottleneck it around 12 gig. So what they do is at the 10 or 12 gigabit mark, they'll start turning off protection. So by the time you hit 20 gig, maybe you're inspecting 1 out of 3 packets, or all of a sudden the stream reassembly has been turned off, or defragmentation has been turned off, or there's certain protocol decoders that have been turned off. And, that means that your security effectiveness could go from high 90s down into the 20s from a percentage perspective. And so, one of the things that we do when we test is we're testing both with and without load to ensure that we identify the point of failure because from our perspective it is a failure when security stops working. That doesn't mean you're not going to deploy it in the best effort mode, right? Because you can't afford to necessarily have your mission-critical application go down because of a security bottleneck. But at the same time, you need to know that, okay, we've just hit the 10 gig point. We're redlining because pretty soon our security is going to get turned off. I know that the vendor said it was 20 gig, but it really is only 10. And so things like that and helping you understand how to know when a failure is occurring. We've done spent a lot of time documenting this so that we explain, what does it mean when you see certain things happen from a test result perspective. So not only is the test pack the actual scripts you would run, so you can hit go and get a result, but then interpreting the results is also key. And the other piece of this is it really helps you to by running this yourself, you can figure out what's important to you. And when we're running a test, it's against a very broad spectrum of applications and operating systems and things like that. There may only be a handful of things that really matter to you, and we help you, to basically sort through that and prioritize for what's important to you. So the key is that this will definitely save you time, right? It should save you money because it's saving you time, and it's going to help you make the right decisions from an investment standpoint, or at least know and understand the capabilities of what you're getting into, and it allows you to test things that may not necessarily be in an existing report. We see products all the time but we can't literally test everything, right? So it allows you to do that. One other thing, getting back to resiliency, I mentioned the one aspect with Java as an example, but the other aspect is we've seen this time and again where a product will come into our lab and they'll have a failure of some sort, and then they go back and they fix the failure. So you go from version 3 to version 3.01, and when they come back, they say, look, we fixed this thing, and we test it again. You don't just test the one thing, which is oftentimes what vendors do. They say, hey, did you fix this one thing? They test it. Yeah, let's put a stamp on it and ship it. We test everything all over again, and this is what we can allow you to do. Because 8 times out of 10, when one thing is fixed, something else gets broken in the process. And that 8 times out of 10 is really not an exaggeration. So when you start thinking about firmware upgrades of your existing products, it's really important that you go from a known good to a known good. Otherwise, you really can open up some major security holes. And this is one of the things that the test packs will allow you to do, working on the Ixia equipment, is build this into a continuous QA process so that, okay, we're going to a new version of my firewall or my new next-gen firewall or my IPS or web app firewall or whatever the DDoS, whatever the technology may be. The other thing is that, for example, DDoS, if you're not testing with the latest DDoS techniques, you can get bad results. So, for example, the high orbit ion cannon, there are different revs and different versions. And if you're not always testing with the latest, you could think that you're really in good shape from a DDoS, but the fact is that, oops, that was the last version. The new version actually adapted to get around the DDoS products, and you don't know that yet, right? And the vendor doesn't necessarily know that yet. So this is something that really becomes important that you're staying up to date. It's because, again, this gets to, the adversary is not waiting for you to, do things on your schedule. They're doing things to their advantage on their schedule, and this really should help, again, get things, back onto a level playing field.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because we, hear from customers and accounts that they agree testing's a great idea, they want to do it, but, I mentioned we have, 30,000 attacks. Where do I start? Which ones do I run? So I think, what we've heard from customers is they're looking for test guidance, like give me a framework, give me something to test from that's current, up to date, sort of best practices. And I think, the test packs and the way they're packaged really drives home customers' need to try to figure out what should I test, what are best practices.
Exactly. So questions of, so what do you get with a test pack? So obviously you get the breaking point, Ixia test configuration files, which we've never given out before. There's actually a fair amount that goes into them. an accompanying methodology document, which walks you through it, and that includes a scorecard. Meaning, when we test things, we have internal documents, scorecards that do all kinds of calculations for us and help us spot potential problem areas, and that you get that with the methodology document, and that you get instructions on running the test. So this is, okay, click here, do this. You'd expect that, right? But it also, instructions means helping you understand what the results mean, okay? And so we're supporting the, NSS is supporting the elements, when it comes to the methodology, and Ixia is supporting the functional use cases. As you can see, it's licensed for 1 year, so this is a service. It is a product, it is a package, but we're looking at this as something that we need to really stay on top of with you. So the first 2 test packs currently available are intrusion prevention and next-gen firewall, and we do have additional test packs that are following very short order, including, as I mentioned multiple times, DDoS, web application firewall, what we're calling data center firewall, which has got a very, very different load profile. Those of you in data centers know what I'm talking about. And so on. So there's a whole number of secure web gateway. I can go on and on. A number of different technologies we're going to be testing here. The one thing I want to sort of touch on here is if you have a problem and you're an NSS customer, so you're a subscriber to our research and you have an issue, you can pick up the phone and get an analyst inquiry and literally get the answer to, hey, I need to talk to somebody about this or that. And if you're not, part of what we're going to be offering is the ability to sign up for that capability, that as well. So you can say I need some help, or I'm not unsure I understand this. Now, basic support is still going to be through Ixia, but if there's I don't understand what this result means, help me out with that, or I've run this test and it's bombing out at this point. Can you tell me what's going on here? That would be the kind of thing that absolutely we will get on the phone with you and help you understand what's going on, and say, hey, actually what you're watching here is that the application control for this particular product requires a certain amount of traffic in order to do a fingerprint with a fast path. Because it doesn't have that, it's with a slow path, because it's not enough traffic, therefore the connection rate really is that low. So you are at risk if you deploy this in a data center in a DDoS scenario. That's the kind of thing where you're going to see things you don't expect, and we're very happy to help you out with that.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. We talked about this idea of test and particularly test packs, and so often get asked the question, well, what does it look like, or how does this happen in my network? I guess one of the things to note is often a lot of this testing takes place in non-production networks. Obviously, the financial services example I mentioned with DDoS, that may you're able to do that over a weekend and test the live infrastructure, but often it happens in a non-production environment. So you may need a lab or extra equipment or such. But the couple different configurations, often we can do what's called a one-arm test. So the Ixia box can actually generate all the traffic through your infrastructure, terminating at your real live applications or servers you have, and so you're able to measure performance of security devices through the network and all the way back to your real live load within the network. So that may be part of a test to make sure you're production ready for some sort of real live services, as well as the security infrastructure in front of that. The other mode is what we call two-arm testing, and there Ixia can actually act as the server and the client. So we're circling traffic through your infrastructure or through a particular device or series of devices. And there, this can be very effective for measuring latency and performance, where you want to close the loop and really understand how that device is performing. So that's kind of how a device might get plugged in the network and how testing at a high level functionally might look like. Getting started testing, I mean, you can do, several gigabits of 1 gig Ethernet all the way up through, many ports of 10 gig Ethernet up to a terabit of throughput. So obviously some of the testing that CESS Labs is doing in their lab with very, very high-performance devices is going to be up the very far right of this performance curve. But for a lot of organizations and enterprises, they may not need terabit kind of throughput, so they may actually start at a much smaller form factor device that meets their needs for an individual device testing or some sort of security system test, and so it can scale, I guess in this case, both up as well as down to fit a lot of both enterprise and large test labs need, like what CESS Labs is doing. So I think to kind of wrap up, we want to leave time for questions. Clearly the testing we've talked about today takes away uncertainty. It's very difficult to know that, yes, I won't be attacked or I won't fall victim to breach. But, the kind of things that Vic and I talked about today definitely take away some of the attack surface and take away some of the risk. And I also encourage you, as you think about security planning, to, again, think about adding resiliency to your vocabulary. In addition to vulnerability, some of the things you talk about, that's really important to understand how my security is going to perform. And with the test packs that Vic talked about and the platforms we have, we really think there's a great opportunity to help organizations move forward with security testing. I think there's been a lot of challenges with, well, what's the test plan? What should I test? Where do I start? Maybe I don't have the expertise on my team. The two of us coming together now, you've got, all the expertise that resides at CESS Labs and their years and years of testing experience combined with our platforms. We really think we can make this a much easier task for an organization to take on when they want to do some level of security testing. So with that, I'd like to pass it back to Danielle for questions.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. We already have quite a few that have come in. Our first question is, how does your solution prevent, detect, or remediate attacks such as zero-day vulnerabilities or an APT type of attack?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. I mean, some of the systems that Vic talked about, are aimed at detecting those kind of 0 days and such. So there's a couple of things. Some of the testing that NSS does, and I'll let Vic talk to that, is actually geared toward those kind of tests. But if you look at a lot of those attacks, a lot of times there's techniques the attackers are using. So yes, the attack itself, the content might be a zero that haven't been seen, but some of their attack techniques have been seen, or they're using, ways of attacking. And so through that, large library we have, we're actually testing a lot of attacker techniques. I talked about evasion techniques. So there's a lot of things that do get tested, even though that exact zero-day content may not be in one of the attacks that we have.
Yeah, so I think that there's a big sort of there's a definitional issue with when people talk about 0 days a lot, which the world I grew up in, 0 days is zero-day vulnerability, meaning that nobody knows about it but the attacker. And the fact is there are very, very few of those that actually occur, and very few people actually get hit by those. Most of the time, you're being hit by known vulnerabilities and known exploits, et cetera. What's really important here is that it's unknown permutations, so you can do unknown variants and so on. And if we have access to O days and we run them in some of our tests, that's not the kind of thing that we're going to drop into this product. But having said that, being able to provide and say, okay, this is a unique version or unique way of attacking this vulnerability that nobody has seen before. It was just generated now based upon the information on the vulnerability. It uses unique padding, unique NOPs, unique, et cetera. It means that people who are just doing very simple pattern matching are not going to be able to rely upon that, which is, I think, what you're getting at, right? It's 0 day, meaning that it's something that's not a traditional signature-based approach is going to have a problem. And that's part of what we have in our test methodology, but that's also technology that Ixia has incorporated, and we've been working closely with them on this, into their product. So this is, there are some mix and match and things you can do. It gets to a higher level of sophistication, but, that is possible. Now, having said that, again, I think that if you look at the way most compromises occur, people are missing the basic block and tackling. When I say doing it all right, there's an assumption that security products are 100% capable, and most are not even close, right? I mean, if you think about, we have a slide in the deck that we use here, but we've used in the past. It talks about that, you can expect, on a good day for most products, 95%, and then there's systemic issues. I mentioned Java before, where they simply, whether you layer 5 products or 2 products, it doesn't matter. You're still missing the same things. We've got research we published on this fact. So you've got, let's just say, 95% with one product, and you could put 4 products in, and you can be at 96%, right? You're not going to 99.9. And so when you think about that 5%, and you think about literally the tens of thousands of vulnerabilities that are out there, it becomes a big number very quickly. I mean, that you're really having to deal with thousands of attacks that somebody can use that are known to bypass all the security that you have. And that's the area that most security vendors are not going to tell you, not because they're bad people, but because they're going to focus on telling you the things they can do. And if they didn't do that 95%, you'd have a whole lot bigger mess to deal with. But it's gotten to the point where you need to focus on that 5% or that 2.5% or whatever that number is, right? And these are not unknowns. These are knowns that you can deal with. You have the information available. It's just that nobody has given it to you or presented it in such a way that it's been actionable before now, and that's part of what we're trying to provide here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks so much. Another question looks to be about implementing the next generation firewall. They ask, in the next generation firewall where you're combining firewall IPS content filtering, am I wrong to assume that you are indeed killing the perimeter defense?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. So in terms of the next-gen firewall, I mean, it has certain uses in certain places. It's not designed for every situation, right? I mean, for a lot of data centers, frankly, we've been telling people that it's one thing. We're telling folks with high needs that they should be looking at a separate intrusion prevention and firewall still. Next generation firewall is really good for protecting end users, corporate office environments, where you're thinking about, can my user go to Facebook, yes or no? So it's policy control from an application perspective, and that's what the whole idea is behind the products. They're really not designed, because if you're a data center, what happens if you are Facebook, right? Then other than can somebody come to Facebook, what in your data center, what application control are you going to use? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the port-based traditional firewalling of let stuff go through port 80 and nothing else makes sense. Otherwise, imagine you say, okay, let HTTP through. Well, what happens if you get some management server on port 50,000, some random high port, and you inadvertently let HTTP through, right? So you still need to have a different approach. So my perspective as NSS is it's all about use cases. So that's really dependent. And the fact is that next generation firewall UTM really converged a little while ago, right? So there's not much delta between the two, other than sort of where in the market people are trying to sell to. So I know that's not what a lot of vendors want to hear, but it's the fact is that if you look at the actual capabilities, that's what you're talking about here.
Got it. There's a question about what's being offered. Is this testing environment available as a consulting service instead of a do-it-yourself model?
So we've always had and we've had enterprise clients all the time. We do have the ability, what we're calling private tests, that we do under NDA. So absolutely yes. So this is the only issue with that is that it comes down to getting on the schedule, and there's logistical issues. If you do it yourself, then there's less of an issue. If you're interested, I mean, we can have the conversation of what you're trying to achieve, because it may be some things we do for you and some things you do it yourself, or either we or Ixia can help you get set up, and so that we can transition knowledge from A to B, from us to you. But bottom line is, from a service, consulting service or private testing app, we do it currently, and very happy to talk to folks about that.
Yeah, and from the Ixia perspective, we do that today. Sometimes for clients, either we'll do it directly, or we may pull in one of our partners. So we have partners who have security practices, and it may be delivered through them, or we may do it.
That's a good point. So for us, it's always on our prem. But if you say buy the Ixia gear and you want to have a consulting service, we would recommend that you buy the NSS Test Pack and then hire Ixia to implement it for you and do it from a consulting perspective. So there's different models now that we can provide depending on what you're looking to do.
Okay, got it. The next question is, are the test packs you discussed performing the same tests as those that are used to score security vendor products?
The last part of the question is the core security products? Was that?
Oh, that are used to score security vendor products.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, this is the same scorecard that we use internally, and it's the same tests. I mean, the mandate moving forward is that we develop the test packs based upon our internal procedures, and the whole point is to be apples to apples.
Yeah, and I think that particularly powerful because if I'm an organization and I let's say I look at a group test that has come out of NSS, for instance, and it scores some different devices. That test pack that enterprise can run is based on the same test procedures, the same kind of methodology. So now I could verify that, well, what does that device look like in my environment when I run those same tests? And so it really is, not only is it apples to apples of what the vendors are using, but you could actually take it into your own environment and potentially test that.
Right. So from a group test, if you see a certain result from NSS and say, here's the performance number, here's the evasions that were missed, or so on, you can recreate that. I will say that initially the exploit part of it, we have multiple sources for exploit. Ixia breaking point is one of them, and so we do have other sources from an exploit perspective, but we've been working with Ixia to basically converge that, meaning that they're going out and acquiring from some of the same sources, everything from Metasploit to ExploitDB and Core Impact and all the other folks that are out there, including just Perl scripts with exploits and Python scripts for exploits and so on. So that simply just takes time because it's a lot of QA to make sure that it's correct. Because the last thing I think anybody wants is for someone to say that a product missed an exploit when they really didn't, or someone blocked something when they really didn't. And so there's a lot of QA, as you can imagine, that goes into that. So we do have an initial few hundred that are in there for now, which are a pretty good place to start. And more are going to be added over time.
Okay. Well, thank you both. It is time to wrap up, but I did want to say thanks again to both Fred at Ixia and Vikram over at NSS Labs for your insight today. Presentation was great. And, of course, thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. Just want to remind you guys that the webcast will be available on demand beginning tomorrow on the SC Magazine website, and we hope that you can join us again next time.